I think we'll make a start, colleagues. So hello everybody and welcome to the first of our World Federation of Colleges and Polytechnics webinars. My name is Emma Meredith and I'm the International Director at the Association of Colleges. And the Association of Colleges, or the AOC as we're known, we're a membership organisation for colleges of further and higher education and specialist colleges in England, in the United Kingdom. So we're a membership association and we represent English colleges and do a lot of work with the government and awarding bodies and a whole range of different education stakeholders, specialising in technical and vocational education. So welcome everyone to the first webinar in this series, and we're going to be looking at the post-COVID recovery plan, sharing our perspectives from the United Kingdom with all of you and really hoping for your input through the chat today about what the experience is for you in your respective countries. Just a few housekeeping points this morning before we start, and I'll introduce everybody in a second. We are recording this webinar so that anyone who couldn't make it, because WFCP works across lots of different time zones, just so anyone who couldn't make it can hear it at another time. What would be super is if everybody could just keep themselves on mute whilst our speakers are talking. At any point during the webinar, please do use the chat to send us messages, either privately or if you'd like to make a point for everybody, just put that in the Zoom chat at the bottom of the screen and we'll pick up any questions and comments after we finish the presentations. So I'd just like to briefly introduce our other speakers before we move into the first part of this webinar, which will be a short poll to see who's on the line. So could I introduce my colleague David Corke? He's our Director of Education and Skills Policy, and he'll be leading the presentation. And just give us a wave, David. There he is, thank you. And also I'm joined by Dawn Ward. Where's Dawn? There she is, who is going to comment later on. Dawn is the principal of Burton and South Derbyshire College. She's going to give us the perspective from a UK institution after David and I have introduced this morning's webinar. So without further ado, I have a colleague behind the scenes who's doing a lot of the technical stuff for us today, Maria, and she's just going to launch a poll for us, which I hope is going to work given the technology. Just a quick poll for everybody so that we can check which country or region you're from, and also what kind of institution you work in. So are you in an academic or a vocational institution, or are you from the government or a different association? So I'd be really grateful if everyone could just fill that poll in very quickly. That's super, I can see that's working. And that just helps us see who's on the line, and perhaps also might help us answer some of the questions and steer the discussion later on. So quite a lot of people from individual institutes, I think, also some associations. Brazil is leading the way, perhaps because of the time difference in terms of who's on the call. So welcome everybody from wherever you are. Canada, Spain and the UK as well. So just leave that open another couple of seconds and then it will close. Super. I think we can probably close the poll now, Maria. That just gives us an idea who's on the line just now. Great. Thank you very much, everyone. So just to kick us off this morning, I'd like to hand over to David, who's going to take us through the first part of the discussion today, looking at the perspective from the United Kingdom and what we've been doing in terms of helping colleges through the COVID period and thinking ahead to the recovery phase. So David, could I hand over to you to share your screen with the presentation?
No problem. Hopefully you should be able to see the presentation clearly by now. And as you've mentioned, Emma, it's really good to have two great colleagues with us today, yourself and Dawn Ward, who's from a leading college in South Derbyshire. So thanks for everybody joining us today. So the title that we've been given is the what will be the post-COVID recovery plan for education and the global economy. We've got a few simple aims, which is that we're going to go through the sector recovery. So I'll be doing that, and then Emma's going to detail what international engagement looks, how it looks now, compared to as well as what it will look like in a post pandemic landscape. And then Dawn's going to give us a college and leader perspective from one of the best colleges in the country. So really good to have Dawn with us here. So I'm going to go through the sector recovery. The sector recovery is a set of work that we've been doing. We call it Rebuild, and it's about rebuilding, helping rebuild the economy. So we haven't written a sector recovery plan that's just about how we can help save colleges. We've written a plan that helps us rebuild the economy. So it's all linked and articulated to the needs of the economy. So we launched this just over a week ago. It's landed very well with the politicians on both sides, on the left and the right. It's landed well with national governments as well as local governments. And that's really the end piece. We've been working on our recovery plan for a good couple of months now, and we've been doing that with the Department for Education, with our Cabinet Office, with various policy departments across government, to try and link it to all of the plans that they're making and link it to all of the industrial strategy needs. So you can get this report for yourselves. It's at aoc.co.uk, and that the recovery plan is the summary version of everything that we've submitted to government. Under every ask of government that we've got, there is a well detailed and planned economic argument and study. So why do we need a recovery plan? Well, the COVID-19 pandemic and its impact on the economy will be like nothing we've ever seen before, and our response has to match that. So government need to urgently respond to this, and they need a skills-led recovery plan. We need them to avoid the mistakes of past recessions. So we know in 2008, when we had the big financial crisis, that there wasn't a big focus on skills, education and training from central government, and those young people that entered the market, especially the 18 to 19-year-olds, their prospects were damaged for more than 10 years, and that will be expected to last 15 years. And what I mean by that is that their earning potential and their wage gain will be severely damaged compared to those that were not born at the wrong time. In terms of our recovery plan, we're predicting that there'll be a lot more demand for college places because fewer young people will be entering the job market. There's going to be a need for catch-up support to help cover lost learning. There will be many adults requiring training, and there'll be some reduction for places in apprenticeships, because we've already seen in the government sector level data that there is a reduction in apprenticeships, but also there's a reduction in the number of businesses. Lots of businesses are starting to collapse, and the rate of collapse has shot through the ceiling. So we know that there will be fewer apprenticeships. The government will need to run a massive incentives program in order to be able to get us to stabilise the apprenticeship intake. We need government to take bold action, and we need to reduce any what we call post-furlough shock. So furlough wasn't a word that was in our lexicon very regularly, in the popular lexicon, until very recently. And what that means is that government are currently paying for a lot of people 80% of their salaries up to a particular salary cap. And we know that as furlough is taken away, there's going to be a big post-furlough shock. And that's when adults, young people and apprentices will really start to feel the impact of the pandemic. So at the Association of Colleges, we like alliteration. So alongside Rebuild, we've asked government to have a package that helps retain every young person at 16 to 18, make sure that they have a classroom-based program or an apprenticeship that helps them meet their needs and helps them with any lost learning that they may have suffered from. We need colleges to be able to take on students in year and be paid for them as well, rather than having to wait for a year to receive the funding for that young people, as is the method for payment in this country, for lagged learner numbers they're called. We need a relaunch program. So this is the biggest part of the package. We need an 18 to 19-year-old offer, and that is the group that's going to be damaged by this impact the most. But we also need an expanded traineeship program and an expanded apprenticeship program. So we need government to incentivise employers to take on apprentices at the same time as having sectoral protections for sectors that are going to be damaged. For example, catering is a sector that is considered to be under real threat. We need a retrain budget. So in the UK, we've got lots and lots of different types of funding for adults, and we need that to all be consolidated into one simple adult budget that the individual accessing those budgets can identify with. And I won't detail them here too much, but we need government to review all of the rules and regulations and resource education. So we need them to make sure that they fund capital, including buildings and IT equipment, because all other things considered, the only real certainty we have around September is that learning will be much more blended than it is now, because we know that there will be some form of social distancing happening for quite a while. So I just wanted to unpack one of the issues that we have focused on, which is that the offer for 18 to 19-year-olds, because it fits in very well with the topic that we're discussing today, which is the higher technical offer. So the first thing is considering the unemployment rate. So we already know that the unemployment rate is 16% for young people in the UK prior to the pandemic, and that shot up to over 25% now actually, and that will continue for quite a while. So there'll be significant labour market scarring on those education leavers, and this is purely about the 130,000 people that would normally leave the college at 18 and then go into higher education. We know that there's obviously another 200,000 or so people going to higher education, but we're particularly concerned about those 18 and 19-year-olds that will enter the market, because there will not be the jobs to go to that there normally would be. That has a profound impact. It has an impact on cost of unemployment benefits to government, and it also has costs to the individual in terms of lower earnings in work, and then obviously tax and revenue for businesses. So there is significant costs to the individual and government in not investing in an 18 to 19-year-old offer. So we estimate at least 100,000 young people, or 18 to 19-year-olds, would usually be seeking work and will struggle. The scarring effect in terms of cost over 15 years will be about £5 billion if government do not intervene. Now, with education, there is a thing called net present value. So for every pound invested in apprenticeships or in a high level program, government gets, with apprenticeships, at least £28 return for every pound invested. So it's a significant and positive investment. If that money goes into benefits or health or even prison services, then it's a multiple cost to the economy. So when we then calculate what the benefit is, the benefit of government investing, and we've said that they need to invest about £0.8 billion in an 18 to 19-year-old program, part of which would be a bursary program, they would get about £7.2 billion worth of benefit, or 71k per participating learner. And we need to make sure that they target and select the courses that really matter to the economy. So government already know that the economy won't recover evenly across industries, across occupations. So we need to make sure that it's aligned to occupational areas. We've grouped these occupational areas into key workers, high-risk sectors and recoverable sectors. So key worker sectors are those that are in high demand and are like health and care workers, education workers, agriculture workers, those in protective services like the emergency services, and those in transport and logistics. Sectors that we can see from the data already, so if you look at jobs postings data, are very high risk and will be disrupted by lockdown. So we're thinking the catering, hospitality, retail, hair and beauty, they're sectors that are greatly disrupted by lockdown. Then the sectors that are much more easily recoverable or are recoverable to some degree are sectors like IT and engineering, where they've had some pain in this lockdown, but they will have a much quicker bounce back. We've taken all of these sectors and we've cut that data across proximity to others. So we've got a government department called the Office for National Statistics, and they've got a measure of every occupation in terms of its proximity to others. So if you look in the top right quadrant, we've got care services. So that means that they've got a high proximity to others, but the number of job postings in this data is very high. So we've just cut job postings across proximity to others and then categorized them into high risk, low risk, or recoverable. And so sectors like catering in the bottom right quadrant instead of the top right quadrant, you can see that it's a high proximity to others and the job postings are significantly down. So we know that we need to protect and support these these sectors in different ways. So catering, for example, might be an area where we have more traineeships and classroom-based provision than we do apprenticeships. And then the health and care sector might be a slightly different mix because many more are going into the jobs there. So we need to support the sector according to these groupings. So key sector workers, as I've mentioned, agriculture, animal care, health, education, you can see that the proximity to others is very high though. Recoverable sectors are accounting, building, customer services, any form of digital sector. And then recoverable sectors, as you'd imagine, and engineering, HR, legal, mostly professional sectors, as we would call them. High risk continues to be catering, hair, hospitality, and retail. So what do we think government should offer? So we think they should have a locally defined offer at levels 3, 4, and 5. So that's like the last 2 years of high school, and at levels 4 and 5, the first year or two of a bachelor's degree. We need a model for upskilling or reskilling. So it might be that people need to change their career objectives. So that might mean studying in a completely new sector, or they might need to have more up-to-date or newer, more specialized skills in a particular area. And so that needs to be an option as well. They need a broad employability package, including CV writing, job techniques. We need to provide them with job boards and opportunities to employ. We're engaging with national bodies to make sure that at the local level, employers like the NHS and construction sector are really putting a cohesive and wraparound offer, including interview guarantees with sectors where there is a big demand for newly skilled individuals. We need government to support this programme with high quality blended learning content, because we know that there's going to be some form of social distancing for quite some time. Work placements for those that need them, and we need it to be flexible where possible. So it needs to be unitizable, so that if someone can leave to get a job, that there's no penalty for the individual or no penalty for the institution delivering them. The cost of this programme is £500 million for the education element, and a bursary cost of 0.3 billion. We've costed that at slightly less than somebody would get on benefits, so that there's an actual return on investment rather than not working on unemployment benefits. And we want them to use the existing mechanisms that we use for funding, so that they can be administered really, really quickly. So those are our core asks of government. We need our government to respond urgently, and we know that the government are about to put an industrial, technological and infrastructure programme together. So we've put months and months of work into this, and we think that the government recognise the economic need, especially where the blended and apprenticeship level programs are. So that's everything from me. I hope you have some questions, but do fill them in the chat box, and I'll now hand over to Emma, who's going to talk us through what international engagement looks like.
Thanks very much, David. We've included a few slides on international engagement because we feel that probably most institutions on this webinar, you'll be dealing with the impact of COVID domestically, but you're probably working internationally or have international partnerships. So it's useful to discuss this dimension as well, because COVID really is a global problem. It's everywhere, and every country's had to manage this. And I think that really to deal with COVID, we do need global cooperation through organisations such as WFCP to be able to share best practice about how we're managing the pandemic on a national scale and what we can share from other countries to help us through what will be economically and educationally a very difficult time ahead. So I think COVID really has disrupted the traditional forms of international education activity as we know them. So that would include student mobility, international exchanges, any kind of face-to-face training that you might provide if you're an institution for officials or for teacher trainers from overseas. It's disrupted conferences, including our own WFCP conference that was expected to take place this autumn, all kinds of other international events. Here in the Northern Hemisphere, it's had quite a big impact on our summer school season. This is normally the time of year when we have a lot of people come to the UK to take summer schools, particularly in English language, and it really helps to boost tourism in the United Kingdom as well. So most of that activity has had to be cancelled. And if you work in research or other kinds of international projects, it may well be that your activity has been disrupted as well, particularly if it's research that involves scientific use of equipment. You may not have been able to access labs or other materials that you need to keep that research going. So it really has disrupted COVID, international work as we know it. And just to talk about a few of the, if you like, the major areas of impact for us in the UK, when the UK went into lockdown, which was in mid-March, what we found was that many of our international students studying here either got home very quickly ahead of the lockdown or simply couldn't get home at all, because the UK began to see that a lot of the flights internationally were being stopped. Some countries closed their international borders. So we've had a real mix of students stuck in the UK and other cohorts who've just completely gone back home and who are now learning online. So in the UK, all of our colleges moved very quickly to operate a virtual campus. We may hear a little bit about that from Dawn later on, how that's worked. So literally within a matter of days, colleges switched from being face-to-face to online. And it doesn't mean they didn't have online operations before, but the scale of this has been completely different. And even for those colleges or institutions that perhaps operate campuses overseas or have significant activity overseas, some of that operation as well has moved to be delivered virtually or remotely. So this has all had a financial impact on institutions. AOC, we put out a survey to our membership in May, and we asked a number of questions about the forecast financial impact from COVID. And about a third of the colleges that responded to that survey said that they would see a loss of income, of international income, because of COVID in the current financial year. So that is an impact on top of apprenticeships and other areas of college commercial activity that simply won't be taking place in the scale in which it was expected. So many international contracts have had to be cancelled or postponed. Students have asked for refunds. In some cases, staff working on international projects have been furloughed, this word that David mentioned before. So they're, if you like, they're effectively away from college or away from the institution for a while. So all of this has also meant that in some instances in the UK, perhaps less so in the college sector specifically, but in other areas, some international students have experienced hardship. Some of them in some countries around the world relied on part-time work to help fund their studies. And as lockdown happened and a lot of the catering or part-time work that international students often are able to get. There's a lot of that disappeared. Then so did the source of income for the international students. And I have seen some stories of students who've really struggled to see themselves through lockdown and try to return home. So there's some of the logistical impacts and the operational side. But what about the policy side? What has government done to help international students and institutions like colleges through COVID-19? Well, in the UK, our government needed to catch up quite quickly on its student visa policy because we obviously had a lot of students who switched to learning online, which is not currently permitted through one of the main visa routes for international students into the UK. So the government made a series of concessions to allow international students to study online, and they've extended that through to the next academic year as well, so that international students, until we reach a safe point at which students can fully return in person, they will be able to study online or through a mix of blended learning. So we've really needed those government concessions on student visas and immigration to be able to keep everything going and to manage student expectations. So now I think a lot of our colleges in the United Kingdom, also the universities and English language schools, they're doing a lot of planning for the next academic session in terms of the logistics of having some categories of students come back into college. How will that work? What will the social distancing measures be that need to be in place? What restrictions are there on travel as well to the United Kingdom? So that's the position that we're in at the moment. And I'd be interested to hear in the chat and the discussion whether that's a similar position in your countries. But if we look to the future, David, could you push me forward one slide, please? Thank you. What does the future hold for international engagement and cooperation? A lot of work has been done by a whole range of different organisations looking at how international education may change in the future. I know here in the UK, our Arts and Culture Society, the British Council, has put on a lot of webinars looking at this. My own view is that international education will look the same, but it'll be different. And that might sound completely paradoxical. How can that be the case? Well, I think that a lot of the activities that constitute international education and exchange will stay the same, but they're going to have to be done in a slightly different manner to keep those partnerships going. So I think one of the biggest restrictions is going to be travel. Even though at the moment some of the travel restrictions are being lifted, people may very well be cautious around travel. So are we really likely to see some big conferences and events happen to the same scale as previously? I think it will take a while for that to come back. I also think that more students will be studying online or using a mix of online learning for the foreseeable future, although I think the jury's still out about whether online learning becomes a sustainable format for the future. On international mobility and student exchange, again, I think the travel side of this means it might be more difficult, particularly for the rest of 2020. Perhaps it will pick up again in 2021. So we may look at virtual exchanges, or using all these platforms like Zoom and Teams, can we transfer training and all sorts of other international activities to an online format? And equally, in terms of what students wish to study if they choose an overseas education, or what governments look to invest in if they send their employees abroad, or companies look to train people in, I think that might change, because as David's outlined, some of the labour market trends are moving. So I think the demand for key skill areas internationally will also move accordingly as countries look at what they need to revitalise their own economies. So to summarise, I think blended learning is likely to be the short-term model for international learning, particularly when it comes to international students. We'll see a phased return to face-to-face teaching, and it may well be that specific subject areas have to be prioritised. For example, in our sector, which is focusing on vocational and technical education, areas that really do need the practical input and they need access to laboratories, workshops, art rooms, or whatever practical element that there may be included in the course. I think we will see fewer international students this year, the rest of this year, probably next academic session as well. And this isn't just because of the restrictions around travel in terms of flights stopping, it's also perhaps the cost as well. Some airlines are in difficulty, some routes may be under threat. It could push the cost of international travel up. in addition to some of the quarantine measures that are currently in place. We have this in the UK at the moment, where if you arrive in the UK, you need to isolate yourself for 2 weeks. To be frank, this is quite an off-putting measure for international travellers and students. So until such a time as that can be lifted, or we agree air bridges with different countries to make sure that everything is safe and secure, but to minimise the quarantine, I think will be a while before the numbers that we've seen in terms of international students moving around the globe really pick up again. I also think that the perceptions of how different countries have managed or are managing the COVID-19 situation will also influence decision-making and student choices in the future. What the national press says, what the press says internationally about different countries, I think that will have an influence, and social media. I mean, as I said at the start, this is a global problem, and it is not a competition for who can, manage the situation the best. But people will be concerned. Parents and sponsors may be concerned about exactly how safe is it for my young person to go abroad or my adult to go overseas. So I think that will be a deciding factor for the short term at least. As I mentioned earlier, I think online, that there are a lot of questions still to be answered about whether online is a suitable format, whether it can ever really replace face-to-face learning, what's the quality of some courses that are offered online, the sustainability of it, and investing in platforms that really make online learning a very good way of learning. I think absolutely this is a way forward, but it may not be the right choice for everybody. Some people will definitely still prefer face-to-face and more interaction. Having said that, an overseas education is very expensive. So another argument is that online learning is actually more accessible to a greater number of people. So I think we may see a mix of learning, but I'm interested to hear people's thoughts and debate this a bit further with everybody who's on the call. So I shall stop there. Those are some thoughts on international learning, and I'd like to hand over to Dawn just to give us a response from a college and an institutional perspective. And not only is Dawn the Chief Executive at Burton South Derbyshire College, but she's also a board member of WFCP. So Dawn, it'd be great to hear your thoughts.
Thank you, Emma. David. As it was stated earlier, I lead a further and higher technical college in the UK, and like many of colleagues that run institutions across the country, it's been a challenging time, but I think from what I've heard when I've spoken to lots of people across the globe and in the UK, the support of our associations has been amazing. It's been fantastic, which has been really, really important. And I think it's been wonderful for us to feed into, so the Association of Colleges, in terms of looking at what they are positioning to government. I think it would be useful perhaps just to share some of the, if I say challenges and opportunities that we faced, because we have strong industry partners like many of you. We also have strong industrial partners, and we also have lots of international partners as well as university and school partners. And I think where we were fortunate, like many colleges, is we had invested 1.5 million 18 months ago. Part was towards our 2028 vision, so moving towards that online learning. So we were able to move quickly, like many, many colleges. Part of the challenge that I've heard across again has been about getting devices and Wi-Fi access to learners. Again, we did that quite quickly. We're quite fortunate that we have a bursary in the UK and being able to use that effectively. We obviously stayed open all the way through. So again, our government asked us to retain our working right the way through, making sure that our students who got an education healthcare plan could access learning. And equally, we run a nursery like many colleges, and the nursery, we needed to retain its opening to make sure that key workers could stay in work throughout the country. So one of the key things I think that we tried to do in that initial period was to work, as I've said, with the association, but more importantly, to focus on key people, obviously our students, to focus on their families, to focus on our community and our relationships that we have with industry and international partners as we were going through. And that in the early days, as I'm sure everybody that's on this will recognise, it was very, very long hours and trying to manage that time in order not to put pressure on people. And we had a range of staff, some who I would say they were fantastic and they're doing an amazing job, but some people lived on their own, some people were shielding. So I think it was really important for us to push on the mental health side. We did a lot of work and activity on that. We put in things like many of the colleagues, and ours was we had tea at 3. And got people to share having tea at 3. Staff came up with lots of activities for students, for staff to keep them fit and working together. I think probably what was quite key for me was I actually put in a weekly catch-up with my chair and my vice chair. So some of you will refer to those as trustees. And I think that was really critical in terms of, you know, the shift from being on-site to now totally off-site. It was really important for them to know where we were, what was going on, and managing through that process. So I say weekly updates, I did Zoom calls with them, and I continue to do that now. I think it was important as well to recognise that the challenges that we faced as we started to come back. So again, government 2 weeks ago, so it's our end of our second week, we had to wait for all the guidance that came out, not only about returning some students to campus, but the big thing was really about their qualifications. So within the UK, and I know this is similar in some other countries from talking to board members at different meetings, we moved the awarding bodies to either, they told us we were either calculating grades. There was a lot of work to do in terms of setting the policy and reviewing that, making sure there was no unintended bias set within that as well. So not just looking at the sort of data sets and working through the policy. We also then had where awarding bodies, particularly on sort of licence to practice technical and vocational subjects, where we had adaptive assessment. So if you take things like hairdressing, they can't work on each other, but the awarding bodies have set criteria of working on blocks to go through. So the planning in terms of going back, I suppose the logistics, not only in terms of setting up, I wouldn't say it was highly expensive. I think we probably spent in the region around 40,000 UK pounds to sort of make sure that the building was safe, that we got appropriate setup in sort of one-way systems, all the sort of things that you would expect in terms of government guidance, and managing then those students and learners. We still have the majority of staff working off-site. So we were very clear that in those early days, to keep it safe, we needed to restrict the number of people coming through. We've had to adapt the systems and policies in terms of recruitment for the future. And we're now in the cycle of the project planning, ready to move back for September. So it's been interesting, it's been challenging, but I have to say that further education always steps up to the plate. And as David set out in the beginning, I think it's important to note that actually all of our economies across the world, it is the further education sector it's truly going to need. You know, it is going to be the workers that we're going to need to get back into work to get the economy going. And it's really important that as we see the unfurloughing of people, and we're starting, as David said, we're seeing that with apprenticeships, we're seeing people losing their jobs. And again, I know from talking to the board members and reading the news, you know, that's across this globe. And I think what was really important for us to do is to keep talking, to sharing the lessons learned, to look at where there is good practice. And I know that the Association of Colleges sits on the World Federation of Colleges and Polytechnics board as well. And that's a great thing in terms of being able to share our experiences and working through. I have been, just hit mute then, didn't I? I've been really, I shouldn't say surprised, but really uplifted by the superb work that the staff have actually undertaken way over and above. You know, their rise in terms of just switching overnight, dealing with the isolation, dealing with the anxiety, you know, the anxiety that people have felt across the world, their care and their compassion for the students, making sure we had quite a few international students and making sure we took care of them and made sure they were able to get home safely. And until they did, you know, giving them the appropriate support to do so. I think it's interesting, Emma's juxtaposition on international in the future. I was asked not long ago by another board member about did I think it would be the same, and I think this pandemic will change the world, there's no doubt about it. It will change what people do in the future. I think the young people that are growing up in our countries now will have a very different value set going forward. I also think we will see a lot of entrepreneurs that will come through. You know, as people lose jobs, people will look at setting other businesses up and thriving, surviving and moving forwards. In terms of the international, we've on ours started to do international, the students that would normally come to us, we have been delivering online for some of those. We're looking at creating more online packages, working with them. But I do think if I speak as a parent, and I have my youngest son is 20, my eldest will be 23 soon, and I would be very happy as we move forward for them to actually have an international experience. I worked all over the world at a young age, and I think it's the best education I ever had. I think people will be more selective of where they go. Maybe they'll move away from big cities. I think we will return to some international work, whether it's on the same scale that we have now, but I think we will do it. People will want that, but they will actually look at where they actually go to study. Is it a safer environment? Can we travel? How do we get there? Are we going to be looked after? I think there will be different questions asked rather than I just want to be in a big city and explore different things. So I think things are going to change. I think we are a sector that respond to change. We're up for change and our staff are. And it will be an interesting place as we move forward. I know that this pandemic has moved a vision that my board set up in 2015 for 2028. I know that that's now been accelerated so far forward, which is wonderful to see. And my intention is we shouldn't go back to doing what we were doing in the past, because we need to move forward, not return. So those are the things that I'd like to share.
Thanks very much, Dawn. Thanks to both you and David for outlining what we can think about in terms of the post-COVID recovery and experiences on the ground. We've got a couple of comments coming through. There's one from Isabel Garcia Plazas there, Dawn, that completely agrees with what you were saying about international experiences and the enrichment that it provides to people, and virtual experiences as well, that how valuable they are. And now we've got about 15 minutes left in which to have some discussion and questions. Given the number of people on the call, it's probably possible for people to unmute themselves if they wanted to say anything, including any of the WFCP colleagues who are on the call, if there's anything that you'd like to say. Meanwhile, we have actually got a question and a comment that Professor Judith Lammy has put on the chat. Judith, I don't know if you want to say something, if you wish to, or I can read your question out. If you wanted to unmute yourself, if not, I can read your question. That was just in the chat. And basically, it's thoughts on international, but whether we see international student support changing and what the challenges and questions might be around well-being as well.
I think that's a really interesting question, Emma, isn't it? Because obviously if people are undertaking more blended learning and not travelling, and we know that experience we're having now, you know, the sort of emotional and well-being of students is really important. So it's something that we do need to put into the mix on how do we manage that? How do we make sure we give that appropriate support? So I think it's a really, really good question that's been asked there.
Okay. I know Judith is trying to unmute but can't, but I'll perhaps just... Are you there, Judith?
Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, go ahead.
It's me, not the technology. So no, it's been brilliant. Thank you very much. Yeah, it was. I'm just also conscious that I've been talking to some international students. I do some mentoring at the moment. And I suppose it's whether we think that some of the supports for students, let's say we're going to a second spike and they're here, you know, do you think that some of the support that we're giving to students will have to change potentially actually for benefit, you know, as we go forward, particularly for new ones coming in. And therefore then should we sort of say that to any potential new students before they arrive?
No, I think it's a really good question. I mean, I'm very keen to hear from others as well. I've been involved in a few webinars and discussions recently in the UK with other associations such as ours from the university, English language and school sectors. And we've been talking, for example, about how strange next academic year is going to be if we are, you know, using blended learning and not everyone is in college all the time. And I think it's, in that sense, international students and home students are in very much the same position, I think. And I think one of the key areas that we're going to need to look at is supporting international student mental health. Dawn touched on the issue of mental health. I think that's very important, but particularly for the international students, if in the UK, for example, our quarantine measure stays in place, we'll have international students arriving whose first experience is going to be 2 weeks of being completely on their own before they're able to integrate with the college and local community. So I think student support has to change. And I think already, from what I've seen, colleges have adapted well to putting in place virtual support and trying to keep in contact with the international students. And I think that resonates across every country presented on this call that's going to have an international student. They're going to have to find different ways of supporting their students. Does anyone else want to make a comment? Dawn, did you want to say anything? Or
no, I think you're right. I mean, you know, we faced it at the moment when we went into lockdown, and there is that part. I think we had someone going back that arrived literally just as we went into lockdown, and we were faced with that challenge, and you just have to deal with it, don't you? And as I said, I think the wonderful thing is, Effie, people do respond. People are very caring and supportive and passionate about their students. I think it will be challenging if you had a lot of students arrive and then we suddenly had a second spike. But I think in terms of the blended support, we need to do that, you know, as we move forward while we're waiting for further releases and the quarantine to change.
There's another good question in about vocational training and how that can continue digitally given the distancing restrictions that we're facing. I mean, David, you speak to a lot of college principals and senior staff. Are they reporting back to you? I know you have a principals meeting just after this webinar, actually, what they're doing to try to support vocational training and maybe particularly prioritising apprentices as well.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot going on the digital front. I've just put into the chat a series of articles that we've published with a charity that focus on how sort of ed tech strategies can work post COVID. So they're free to and open to access. So do go and have a look. I mean, the broad advice, I think, is that you shouldn't try and replicate what in the classroom or online, and any measures that you take in terms of participation, whether it be time spent online or time spent on platforms or streaming lessons, does not equate to any quality measure. It's not about, it's just a measurement of time. And so you really need to think about how you structure your learning, sequence your learning, how you think about cognitive load and how you consolidate learning as you would do in any class, but without all of the social cues as to whether people are interested in what you're talking about or not. So I think it's really important that you think about the content in terms of curation and curation. I think that governments need to help colleges sort of collaborate at scale where good quality content is concerned. So I think just keep it really simple. And the digital divide is a really significant issue. Dawn mentioned a device bursary earlier on for the digitally disadvantaged, and what we're finding in people's households is that, you know, there might be one laptop between a whole family, or there might not be internet access, or there might not be free to use internet access, you know, in terms of CAT connections, or people might need to use mobile connections. So it really is difficult there. I mean, I think it depends on what you talk about by technical as well. So we know that we've been doing work with our inspection agency recently on this front, and we know that, and from surveys, we know that learners on lower level courses, learners that are on trades or practical courses are slightly less engaged, and also those that are doing courses where their grades were calculated, that there's slightly less engagement. And although there are some colleges really entering into a field of immersive learning through things like HoloLens technology, it's difficult. But in terms, back to what I said earlier on, blended is the only certainty for September, and so we have to take it a step further, and we have to invest in the infrastructure, people's infrastructure as well. There's lots of teachers that haven't got the confidence that others have. So we need to really support the teachers first and get the content sorted where we can.
Emma,
Did you want to add?
Yeah, I was going to pick up practical, because I think, you know, David's comment, and I've heard it from other principals across the country about certain sort of students that haven't engaged as well. And we have been really, really fortunate. What we did see is where we did direct online, therefore whether it was through we use Canvas, so the big blue button, so where it was live teaching, our sort of I would say craft level students, so motor vehicle, all those, really fantastic participation. But it will never ever replace, you know, my background originally, as you know, I trained many years ago in hairdressing and beauty therapy, and you do have to do hands-on. None of us would go for virtual massage, would we? Or a virtual haircut, and I think people will really appreciate hairdressers after this pandemic. It won't be just hairdressers. So I think everyone's in the boat. So I think the thing is that what you can do is blended, but we will always have to do some practical hands-on. You can't take that away. You would not want an electrician coming into your house that hadn't practically completed you know, that training and assessment. So I think there are things we can do. There's, you know, there's videos, as you said, David, sharing, you know, good practice. I mentioned it's always really important, the lessons learned from this. And what you have to do is, and we've done in many ways, is we've pushed, haven't we, the sort of the theory, the academic base forward. And what I said now is happening is those adaptive assessments, so those practical assessments, they are coming into college, and those are our priority students to make sure they've got their qualifications. So we can never go totally to online. It would, but we can see for September we might have to do some blended learning if we are still at 1 metre, or whether it's 2 metre back, who knows, whichever, because as we know, students don't stand 1 metre apart or 2 metres apart in our colleges or, you know, institutions. They gather together. It's a, you know, social interaction. So
the important emphasis that you've just made there is that the emphasis on blended learning rather than online teaching, isn't it? So that's really important. You talk about the practical subjects in that way. And one thing that we're doing that we know that the government is excited about, and we think will be practically useful, is we've built a local modelling tool for the R number that we're going to give to all colleges and schools, and it would apply in other international settings as well, but taking local data in terms of infection rates and then being able to model your curriculum based on staff and student numbers to look at how your provision can be set up as things spike or things reduce. And so we know that it's going to be a bit of a lumpy move out of this lockdown, and we need to help institutions be able to plan at the institutional level rather than just at the national level. And we know that there's guidance coming out about significant relaxation for adults. I think for us at the moment, the adults, especially those on the technical subjects where they're waiting for their assessments that need to practice, and they're important to the key work economies, are really important to get going very, very soon.
There are a couple of other questions just to pick up in the last 5 minutes. I think we've sort of started to go into this about teacher training and support and the transition to effective online learning, because I think it's fair to say that whilst educational institutions transition to online learning, there are varying levels of skill sets, if you like, amongst teaching staff to be able to grapple with this, and having to do so very quickly. Dawn, I don't know if you want to say anything about how you supported your staff with this and how they adapted to online learning.
I think, as I said earlier, Emma, we were quite fortunate because 18 months prior, we'd done a significant investment. It was part of our 2028 vision. And because we'd done that, we'd done quite a lot of training. I would say the big emphasis there was all on our teachers. And obviously a lot of our support staff would also be used to working with technology, because obviously if you're in finance, etc., that's what you're doing. But there were some staff that perhaps we needed to update on devices to work at home. So the challenge for us was on that side. And we managed, because the college buildings, we kept the university centre open for the for the vulnerable learners that were coming in during the time. We also had our IT help desk, and people had to book in. So we made sure there was a facility, you know, they could work on things remotely, put that support in. We naturally, like everybody else, as I said earlier, looking at the lessons learned and the things that we need to add and adapt as we move forward. And I would say for us, the bigger challenge probably was some in support areas, making sure they had that appropriate technology at home.
And I think this is taking us into the final question as well, about the role of associations and working together. There's a couple of comments about how do we, if you like, almost protect small and medium-sized institutions that may be very vulnerable through COVID, but equally, you know, for online learning, there are some very large providers, and there's probably a lot of competition developing. So again, how do we help different providers get involved? And I think, I mean, certainly on the teacher training side at AOC, we've put on a lot of webinars about sharing best practice. We've got practitioners from colleges to present on what they're doing, so that we can try to support that alongside what individual colleges have been providing for their staff. And I think the whole sector across further education, but also the universities, the technology companies, have tried to share resources and platforms in the UK. So I think there has been a degree of best practice sharing, in the sense that everybody is in this together. But I think, you know, hopefully associations like ours and WFCP can continue to provide a good source of formal collaboration as we go through COVID. And I think it is going to be very important to hear from other countries, because you know, there may be a tip that you can share that one country is not aware of, or particular institutions not aware of, that can help out somebody else. So I think that international cooperation, I don't think that will disappear with COVID, even if in terms of our operations we have to stay working very, very locally for the foreseeable. And we've only got about a minute or so to go, so I think we'll perhaps close it off there. David has put on the chat a link to the technology and learning articles that we've produced at AOC. I'd like to thank everybody for asking the questions and making the comments. It's been very helpful. Thank David and Dawn for their participation, and Maria at WFCP for arranging everything. So thank you very much, everybody, for tuning in wherever you are in the world. It's really nice to engage with colleagues from different countries. So thank you very much, and see you at the next one.